Erdogan is not doing fantastic. Okay, so we need to talk about Turkish democracy in a crisis. Now, this is nothing new. Turkish democracy has had many crises over the past decade. Over its existence, it's had many crises, military coups intended to preserve democracy, and periods of martial law following, and then more coups later when the secular nature of the state was being threatened, and so the military thought it was in their role to step in and preserve. That you can go and you can study Turkish history. It's very interesting. I'm not an expert, but what we're talking about today is the most recent crackdown. See, Erdogan is not doing fantastic when it comes to his polling data. Now, that's not to say he's doing terrible, but what I'm saying is that he's not clearly beating his next closest rival, who was preparing to run for election in a few days, run for president against him. And the polling seems to indicate that they're neck and neck. They're very close. Now, this guy, his name is Erdogan. Now, he's the mayor of Istanbul. And the thing that's interesting about this guy is when he actually won to become mayor of Istanbul, Erdogan and his party, because he's from an opposition party, claimed that it was rigged. They said, bull crap, that dude did not win. I'm Erdogan, this is our party. That was rigged. It was a rigged vote. You need to do it again. We're going to do a redo. Ridiculous. And so they did a redo, and then he won by an even larger margin. So that did not work. But even though he is the mayor of the most populous city in the country, which is, the only city in Turkey I've even passed through while traveling, a major center of commerce and trade and transportation and culture, he is still a man that is vulnerable to Erdogan. Now, the problem was that up until recently, there was a few issues. Number one, Erdogan has problems with popularity due to issues with the economy that has not been addressed. And post last election, his polling numbers have suffered because of that. Number two, I think, and this is my personal analysis, with the conflict in Syria dying down, it might be a little bit more difficult to distract or take away from certain domestic issues with foreign policy conflicts, since there has been an agreement already came to fruition between the Kurdish-dominated SDF and the government in Damascus. So, further Turkish raids and fights against the PKK is going to be difficult. But if he can deliver that PKK ceasefire that has been talked about with Aslan being freed, maybe that can help him in the polls, but that's not certain. That's not certain at all. It's not certain that the ceasefire with the PKK that's being talked about is going to succeed. And even if it does, who knows if that's going to lead to him being reelected? I mean, George Bush thought the war in Kuwait and his victory over Saddam Hussein would be something that could propel him into a second term, so George Bush Sr., that is, and it did not. He lost. And so that is certainly not a surefire victory. And so with the polling neck and neck, even with this talk of the PKK ceasefire, Erdogan has decided, unless you really buy his allegations, and this is the allegations that they've thrown out, that his top rival is in league with the Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK, Abdullah Öcalan's organization, and also racketeering and being the head of a criminal organization. So, I mean, basically everything in the kitchen sink this guy has done. Now, I find it very hard to believe that Erdogan is in leagues with the Kurdistan Workers' Party as the mayor of Istanbul. I find that very hard to believe. I also find it hard to believe that as the Kurdistan Workers' Party is starting to go through a peace process with the government, that now would be the moment that all of this would come crashing down, or now would be the moment he would embed himself. It just doesn't really make much sense. But he was not the only one arrested. Police detained more than 100 people. They were politicians, journalists, businessmen, and these were people that were basically in its entirety, those that were critical of the Erdogan government. Now, that's not to say that none of these people could not have actually engaged in some criminal activity. See, the way that a lot of times corrupt autocracies work is not by, okay, we're just going to completely make up the charges. That happens too, And I'm sure that within this group of 100 people that is a likely possibility. But a lot of times it's selective enforcement, where a lot of the political elites are violating the laws. And so you simply just do selective enforcement of your opposition while letting your own side get away with it, allowing them to accrue power, influence, as well as rewarding them for their loyalty to the state. Right? It's a type of back-scratching quid pro quo that allows your side to be terribly corrupt, and allows your opponent's corruption to shine on you as you're an anti-corruption crusader and such like that. This has been an issue in China, for example. This has also been an issue in Ukraine. This has been an issue also in places all around the world. Either way, this man right here is arrested. 100 others are arrested. And then he comes out and he calls for protests. Or not really, I don't want to know he calls for protests, but he calls for the people to be on his side. I want to play you his statement of what he said. And there are some protests that are starting in Turkey. I don't know if any of you guys have seen them, but they have been pretty small from what I've seen so far. And the reason that is because the Turkish police are out and about trying to put down really any type of large-scale protest for the mayor getting arrested.
Üzülerek söylüyorum. Milletimizin iradesini.
I say with regret that a handful of minds are trying to usurp the will of our nation by abusing the police. The security forces of this country have messed at the door of my home, homes of 16 million Istanbulites. Hundreds of police are masked. We are facing bullying, but I want you to know that I won't be undaunted. I love you all so much. I entrust myself to my people. Let all our nation know that I will stand upright.
Hepinizi çok seviyorum. Ben kendimi milletime emanet ediyorum.
I will continue to fight with that person and his mind, which uses this whole process like an apparatus.
Aparat gibi kullanan aklıyla mücadeleye devam edeceğim.
So he then gets arrested, 100 others arrested. The police are on the street trying to put down protests. And so the question becomes, why is Erdogan doing this? Well, again, he's neck and neck in the polls. He probably wants to get another term, but there's also a question of whether he'll be able to serve another term, because Erdogan has served so many terms in office, and they've already moved around the laws before to allow him to run again. And there seems to be another effort for Erdogan to be able to, well, run again, but that would require the Turkish constitution once again being gone into, changed around to allow Erdogan to run for president again. And he hasn't even crossed that barrier, and he's neck and neck with this guy. It's risky if you're trying to hold on to power. Do you nip this in the bud before he runs for office, or do you nip this in the bud after he runs for office? You're down 8 points, and you finally just barely got the constitutional thing through with much you nip it in the bud early. You nip it in the bud early. I mean, Erdogan has been in office for well over 20 years now, and we've seen no indication that he is willing to give it up, or that he is not willing to do some pretty autocratic, repressive things in order to keep that power. I mean, he's gone after the press before. He's gone after the journalists before. This is just a continuation of that behavior, but directed at one of the most popular opposition figures in the entire country. So why does he feel safe to do this now? To protect his own skin and to allow himself to try to hold on for power past his constitutional mandate? Well, the reason I think is simple, at least for as far as we're concerned. Now, there's certainly domestic concerns as well, like we're talking politics, and domestic backlash is definitely the biggest threat to Erdogan, which is probably why he has the police on the street, because it will be domestically the reaction that he gets that will stop him, not internationally. And here's the problem that the more liberal-minded internationalists are going to face for now. Europe is no longer solidly supported by the United States. There is a Euro-Atlantic divide that we can now say is a rift, a Grand Canyon, when it comes to values, interests, and how they treat each other's security and debts to each other, paid in blood. And now that Europe is putting down $150 billion for joint procurement, which is a lot of money. And they're lifting some debt caps and trying to look at private means of financing defense spending. And we're seeing the German government get rid of their debt ceiling for not only rearmament, but also aid to Ukraine. And we're seeing all these actions. Europe's taking its security seriously because the Russians are on the front foot and they are behaving like they're winning. Like they are ready to establish a sphere of influence in Europe, redominate parts of the continent, which the European Union has no interest in, a return to that type of politics. And so they're building up military strength. Turkey, in this equation, is a massive ally. It has one of the most powerful armies in the world. It's industrializing militarily. It's trying to build up its domestic military economy very quickly. Its military spending is not going down anytime soon. And the Turkish public largely support Ukraine. And there has been instances of the Turkish government backing up Ukraine, both diplomatically, saying that it backs up its territorial guarantees, and when it comes to certain military deals. Now, there's always more wiggle room for them to do more. I think one of the most significant things Turkey has done is not allow the Russians to reinforce the Black Sea fleet, which mean that after the Ukrainians disabled it with their naval drone campaign, it basically destroyed any idea of the Russians doing naval landings in Odessa. And so that was helpful because they controlled the strait into the Black Sea, and they don't allow ships to go in during wartime to be used for war. But there's more that they could do. If they were to provide Ukraine with more military assistance, that could be helpful. If they were to, stand in line with the Europeans to try to deter further Russian encroachment into Europe, try to fill some of the power vacuum that America is leaving, not only would that build up Turkey's influence, but it might also allow Turkey another way into the European Union, which is a long-standing goal of Erdogan. So we're not just talking about the possibility of Europe looking the other way as Erdogan develops a deeper and deeper autocracy at home, but we're also talking about Erdogan using the security crisis and the possibility of either support for Europe and support for Ukraine as a way to leverage himself into the European Union. Now, still, you're going to need agreement amongst the European Union for something like that. And so certain nation states might object to something like that. But I could see the diplomatic avenues for it. I could see it. Either way, I think that the Turks believe that the Europeans and the West have no interest in policing their domestic democratization at this point. Even as Trump talks about how much he cares and how important it is that Ukraine has an election. Okay, U.S. aid.